Hi there, it's Hunter from Japanorama.co.uk. I just wanted to do something a bit different this week. This is kind of a response to what Alfie had put up on the website, and it's just showing two sides of the debate, really. It's not trying to irritate anyone or anything like that. It's about photographers' rights, and as you can see here, there's an advert that's kind of been all over London recently saying, whether, basically questioning photographers, and I wanted to show the two sides of the argument really, where photographers had to question whether or not they should shoot something themselves, or photographers who've come up against limitations put against them by the government. So recently there was a kind of protest by photographers, by news photographers outside Scotland Yard. There's about 150 of us who went to try and do something about it. So we've got some footage of that coming up in a minute. An interview with Mark Thomas by Sky News, which is interesting. But yeah, just want to get you guys thinking, really.
Taking a photograph of a police officer or a member of the security forces or armed forces. In fact, you can have your equipment seized, you can be looked through, actually you have to provide a good reason, a reasonable excuse of why you took the photograph. Now what this does, in effect, is it has an enormous effect on all sorts of people. It has effect on news gatherers, it has effect on NUJ snappers. So I'm an NUJ member. So as an NUJ member, I'm here to support my fellow trade unionists who actually are going to have their livelihoods curtailed and made more difficult by this law.
Right, so that was Mark Thomas there, and he's a he's an NUJ member. He's a professional journalist, and there's been real problems in England at the moment amongst photographers. They've had a lot of equipment seized. People have had people holding hands in front of lenses. Real extreme stuff, and it's actually becoming quite difficult. Professional photographers in England to have a free rein as journalists to be able to get their jobs done. Whereas in Japan things are slightly different. We're still quite lucky out here in that people don't really mind what we do as photographers. Anyway, so that's the professional perspective really back home, and that's the difficulties that people are having. And then what I wanted to do was show you kind of the other side, which was look at photos which people have had to take, events which people have had to cover, but whether or not they wanted to, or whether they deemed it acceptable for themselves to shoot it, is kind of another story. And I thought it'd be interesting to listen to some recordings and some takes from professional, really famous war photographers and professional photographers talking about shots they've taken that they're not necessarily proud of, or shots taken that they'd never really thought they should have taken. Just to show, the other side, when we as photographers have to decide whether or not we should shoot something at all, whether or not we're being restricted by the government. So yeah, coming up next is just a little thing on Kappa. Right, so here we have probably one of the most famous images taken of the Second World War. It's one of Kappa's images, I think 11 images of D-Day, which are extremely rare, and some of the only photos that exist of D-Day. Now, because of that, for me, these photos are in a kind of different situation. The event is so important that as journalists, we have to cover it. So I don't see there being anything wrong with shooting something like this. Now, Kappa was a devout war photographer, and he lost his life doing his job. And he's provided us with some of the most important and influential images in history. Because of that, I think these are extremely important. And if I were in his situation, I would have gone and shot it myself. This is Richard Drew's AP photo called The Falling Man. It's a really controversial photo. There's a documentary being released quite soon about it. Now this is a really iconic image, probably one of the most famous news photos from the last 20 years. It's totally different to anything else taken on September 11th. It's very simple, but it's really shocking. And whether or not this photo is right or wrong to take, it's marked itself in history, and that's extremely important. What I wanted to show you next was a photographer who's taken a very similar photo but has been really affected by the work that he's had to do. Right, so next up we have Eddie Adams talking about his famous Vietnam War photo. It's very interesting what he has to say. He's an example of a journalist who's pretty much been given free rein, but actually struggles to deal with what he's created because of it.
All of a sudden, to my left, somebody came out of nowhere, and I seen him go for his pistol, and as soon as he raised his pistol, as soon as he brought it up, I took the picture. I thought absolutely nothing of it. Went back to the AP office, and I dropped it off. I said, I think I got some guy shooting somebody. And I went to lunch. Like, so what? Well, it was a war. No, I'm serious. That's how I felt. I had seen so many people die at that point in my life. It's not nice, but I mean, he shot him. He was a prisoner. He shot him. I might have done the same thing. It wasn't until about a day later when we start getting reports back about what was going on with the picture. I had no idea of the impact, and I still don't understand it even today. General Luan, well, then he was like a colonel, and the whole thing is the picture destroyed his life, and that's what bothers me more than anything else. In fact, not long after, he got wounded very badly in the leg. I went to visit him in the hospital in Saigon, and he was later sent to the States because of his wounds. He never blamed me for the picture. He used the cliche that we hear all the time, is Eddie said you were doing your job and I was doing mine. I guess the picture, I'm told, it did good things, but I don't want to hurt people either. I really don't. It really bothers me. That's not my intention, in other words, being a photographer. That's not what I want to do.
Right, so what Eddie has to say at the end there is probably the most interesting. Clearly he's been affected by the images he's taken, but as he says, he's been told he's just doing his job. And what I want you guys to think about, and what I'm interested in hearing about, is whether or not you think as photographers we should be allowed to just do our jobs, or whether or not the government is getting in the way of us doing our jobs, or these restrictions are, you know, preventing us from doing what we need to do as journalists, or whether or not they're there for our own safety, and whether or not these restrictions will help prevent situations arising such as Eddie's, where unintentionally, as he feels, he's damaged someone else. This video wasn't really intended to irritate or cause any problems or anything like that. I just wanted to hear from you guys what you thought about it, and just kind of open the floor up to debate, really.